Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. The Tennessee Informer is focused on state legislative issues primarily, although we will address federal issues and how they impact our state and what our state legislature could and should do about it. And of course, we'll deal with anything having to do with our rights being violated. Before we get to our first guest, we want to remember that today is the 79th anniversary of D-Day, the invasion of Normandy, Operation Overlord. D-Day, if anybody has seen Private Ryan, I'm sure most of you have, those beach scenes, we've seen it in the theater, those guys lived it. They lived it, and think about the sacrifices those guys made. Think about how they felt when they were getting out of those boats and onto the beach with their buddies getting blown up left and right around them. All the blood, all the death, all the sacrifice that these guys gave us that day. They freed Europe. This was the beginning of the end of the Nazis. But we need to remember those sacrifices, and we need to think about them and others who've come since then, the sacrifices they've made for our country. You know, we have a very comfortable life now. We have the highest standard of living as any nation has ever had, although things are not as good as they could be now. But we need to remember those sacrifices, and we need to be motivated to keep the freedom that these guys fought for. That needs to be our focus. And we don't want to lose it to tyrants in our own country or our own state for that matter. So just think about the veterans. If you know any of them, thank them personally. If you know any surviving members of the family, thank them as well. So now on to our first guest. Now our first topic for today is actually the Second Amendment, which I think all of us support and agree with. And our guest is Richard Archie. He is the West Tennessee Director of the Tennessee Firearms Association. Richard's been involved with the TFA for approximately 20 years. He is the guy that lobbies for us in Nashville. Now, the TFA is not a big organization as far as money goes, and he does all this on his own dime. This guy takes his personal leave to go lobby in the legislature for us during the session, to fight to expand where you can carry your weapon, where you can protect yourself and your family. And he doesn't get paid for it. So there's a lot of other things he does on his own dime, his own gas. He does a lot for this state when it comes to the Second Amendment. I really appreciate it. Now, I'm also a member of the TFA, so I'm a little partial, but those of us who know Richard know what he does, and we appreciate it. And now I want to turn it over to Richard, and we'll get started here with questions a little bit. Richard, you doing all right today?
I'm doing well, Dave. Glad to be on. I appreciate the opportunity to reach your viewers.
Well, I'm glad to have you. I appreciate it. I figured I couldn't start it off with anybody better at the state level, because you are fairly well known and you do get around. And right now, especially with the threat of a red flag session, you're a pretty hot commodity. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I've been burning up the roads pretty much. I've been speaking to a number of reformed Republican Party in the counties. I think you were at one of those in Houston County the other night. So I've been getting in the car and driving across the state because it appears to me right now that folks are hungry to hear about what's about to happen in Nashville.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm afraid a lot of them, if they haven't had a chance to listen to you or talk to you, which, by the way, all your podcasts, they're excellent, they're short and to the point, and they're all on the TFA website. So all you have to do is go to TennesseeFirearmsAssociation.com. You can find Richard's podcast, and you can find articles written by John Harris, our president and founder. I want to get right into the questions, Richard, because I know I can ask a simple question, and you can really fill in the blanks and elaborate.
Okay.
So can you explain what red flag laws are and why the citizens of Tennessee should be concerned about them?
A red flag law is a situation where you have an ex parte meeting. And I'm no concrete finisher and not an attorney, so I had to actually look that up. But ex parte means that you're not present when it occurs. So suppose your next door neighbor didn't like the fact that as you were mowing the yard, the grass was going through the hurricane wire fence and hitting on his yard. And he steps up at the fence and has words with you, and he doesn't like the response that he gets. What he can do under a red flag situation is simply call law enforcement. And what they will do at that point, if he says, you know, this guy threatened me. And so the criteria for a red flag law is if law enforcement thinks that you're a danger to yourself or to the general population, then what they can do is come in and go to a judge and say, we have reason to believe this person is a threat to his next door neighbor. We need to take his firearms away from him. And what the judge does, he signs a warrant at that point without you having anything whatsoever to do to come in and give your own side of the story or whatever. That ex parte hearing takes place. And the next thing you know, they're coming through your door demanding to pick your firearms up. And so what they're doing is taking one type of tool. So if you look at the number of deaths that are caused in Tennessee every year, firearms are not the only thing that does that. There are a lot of people that are run over and killed by cars, or people that are beat to death with bats. All these different things, gasoline, all these things, they're not going to take every dangerous article in your home up. It is simply focused on firearms. And instead of, in fact, if there was a person who was a true danger to themselves or to the community, they're simply going to take that set of tools that they search through your house and find at that point without giving you an opportunity through due process to say, this didn't happen and I didn't make that threat or anything. They just take the weapons first. And then under what I've read from the governor's plan, and 2 weeks later, you get to finally go before a judge and present evidence at that point. But they came in and they took your weapons now. My understanding, if I read everything that I know correctly, the only time that the word infringed is used in the Constitution is when it talks about your right that pre-existed the foundation of this nation or the writing of the Constitution. It was given to you by your creator. It is an unalienable right. But what they're doing in this instance is they're simply just throwing that to the wind and saying, okay, we're going to take that one single instrument and we're going to take that up, because I believe right now what the governor's looking at is simply focusing on guns instead of the true problems that we're confronted with in the state right now, which I believe is mental health. But that's what a red flag law is. They just come in and take your guns, and you can't tell them no, because if you try to resist, you're not going to like the results of it. So that's what a red flag law is. It's an ex parte hearing, which results in law enforcement, and they're the people that make the determination. There's no doctors. There's nobody involved in that. What happens is law enforcement makes that determination, and then they go to the judge, get the warrant, and they come in and take your guns. That's what a red flag law is.
And now that would probably vary how law enforcement handles that depending on where you're talking. So something, say maybe here in Henry County or in Stewart County where I live, they may go about it a little different, but in some place like Memphis, Nashville, any of the big metro areas,
right.
It's probably going to be handled in the worst way possible from everything we've seen.
Yeah, I agree. But the problem of it is that we're promised due process. Right. Your firearms are just like any other piece of property that you own. In Article 1, Section 8 and Article 1, Section 21 talk about the fact that you have the right to personal property. And it's kind of like, I've always said that what they're doing under this scenario right here is they're punishing the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. And so if you had an ex-girlfriend from high school that decided just one day she was fixing to call up law enforcement and say, hey, you know, I'm beginning to remember a conversation that we had when we were in high school. And that guy said when he turned 45 years old, he was going to go shoot up the high school that he graduated in because he didn't like the way the people treated him. They would have to take that into consideration. And if they approached the judge with that, and then that judge said, hey, he's 44 and a half years old, maybe we need to go get his guns. You're not going to have an opportunity at that point to tell them that never occurred. There is so much opportunity for misuse of this situation that is just absolutely incredible, when we've already got a number of different things on the books right now, which would give law enforcement and the medical professional community an opportunity to actually look at the situation. I mean, we actually have Tennessee codes right now that talk about involuntary committal. I think it's 33.6, 402 through 404 that talk about if, in fact, someone believes if a family member, a next door neighbor, your football coach, the high school principal, somebody, depending on your age and where you're at, thinks that you're a risk to society or to yourself, they can actually go to law enforcement and say, hey, we have credible evidence and we think this needs to be looked at. What the police do at that point is they come out and do an assay of the situation. They look at you, they talk to you, and if they feel like the accusation is credible, then what they do at that point is they take you into custody. And they can hold you for 48 hours and carry you in and let a medical professional look at you and let them assay the problem. Not just law enforcement, but a medical professional that would actually look at the situation. If that medical professional found at the end of that 48 hours that you needed further scrutiny, they can hold you for 14 days. At the end of that 14 days, then you go before a judge. You get to bring your attorney in, you get to mount a defense, and they determine at that point whether you are, in fact, a danger to yourself or society. And if so, then what they do is they put you in a position to not be able to harm anyone else. They'll actually take you into custody through an involuntary committal. Now, there was an article in the newspaper last week in the Tennessean that was written by a couple of people from the Associated Press, and I don't remember their names, but the byline said, oh, the governor is really, really upset with the NRA because they've come in and said, well, what Tennessee ought to do is use the laws that are already on the books. And he said, that's going to wind up with us taking these people who have mental problems and taking away their liberty. But it's okay with him that what we would do is go ahead and snatch your firearms from your house. He doesn't consider that something that you have a right to keep in your possession. He feels like it's okay to take that liberty away from you, but he doesn't want to take the person off of the street. And by the way, Dave, here's the thing that is the most, I'm searching for the word because I'm trying to be cautious here, but the thing that gets me the most is if they take your firearms out of your house at 9 o'clock one night, what's the problem with you going and picking up another firearm the next day? And we all know that felons right now can't purchase a firearm underneath the FFL laws and the rules and all the things with background checks, but how many felons have got guns? So they treat stolen guns just like they treat drugs. You and I both know that in Tennessee it's illegal to buy fentanyl or to sell fentanyl, but there's a lot of that going on. There are far more people killed by drug overdose with fentanyl right now than are killed by firearms. And yet what we're going to say is we go take your guns away from you on this one instance, and we're not going to get your gasoline or your chainsaw or your chopping axe, your baseball bat, your hammer, your shoestrings, any of those things. We're not going to take your kitchen knives. We're simply going to limit this to guns. And that's the problem with this red flag situation. They're not treating the person or the situation. They're pointing to an instrument and saying that's the boogeyman.
So if you're a threat to yourself or others, aren't you, and you alluded to this, if you're a threat, you're not just a threat with a gun. If you're a threat to others, you're a threat with a gun, without a gun, with a car, with whatever. So it's not just a gun, but that is the focus of the red flag laws. And Bill Haslam, there's not a lot of difference, Bill Haslam and Bill Lee, that was just a slip, but Bill Lee doesn't want to enforce the laws on the books. That would be the same laws and Constitution that he swore an oath to uphold. Am I mistaken there?
Yeah, to protect and defend.
Right.
One of the things, and you've heard me talk about this simple thing with our legislature. Mm-hmm. They swear an oath that they will not assent to anything, vote, resolution, bill, whatever, that shall appear to them injurious to the people's ability to enjoy the rights and privileges contained in our Constitution. They also take an oath to protect and defend the constitutions of both the state and the union. If you look at Article 6, Section 2 of the federal Constitution, people like to talk about the supremacy clause, all right? But it starts out with these two words, this Constitution, and all laws which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States are the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, the laws of any state notwithstanding. And so you've got to go back to this Constitution, and being the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution. People like to forget that. Yep. And by the way, one of the more serious things that our legislators forget every time we talk about it is in 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States in the McDonald v. City of Chicago case incorporated the Second Amendment against the states, which means now that for every Tennessean, the Second Amendment is a civil right. We can prove that by going back and looking at the Beeler case that was just agreed to by Jonathan Scrimetti, who is our new Attorney General and who appears on every point to be doing a great job. But there was a lawsuit filed by Firearms Policy Coalition that said 18-year-olds are being deprived of their constitutional rights because you won't let them carry a handgun and you won't let them perfect a permit to carry a handgun. Now, when you're 18 years old, all of your constitutional rights vest in you at that age. That is the age of majority for people in the United States. You're required, if you're a male, to register for the vote. You're allowed to sign contracts. You're allowed to vote. You're allowed to get married without parental consent. All these things that adults do vest in 18-year-olds when they get to that age. But yet, we can force them to pick up a rifle and carry it to defend the Republic, but we would not let them in Tennessee carry a handgun to protect themselves. And anybody that's got any semblance of understanding understands that the only person responsible for your safety and security is you. Government is precluded from being responsible for it by qualified immunity. And there are a number of different Supreme Court cases that say, hey, the police, the government, the sheriff, the governor, everybody else that's supposed to be in charge of enforcing the laws cannot be held liable for this under qualified immunity because you can't have them in the presence of every citizen all the time. And we say now, I mean, it's one of the jokes that we tell at TFA, but I carry a handgun because the cop's too heavy to tote around. and that's a fact because they can't be there. But even if they are, if you understand the strictures and the rules put down in the Constitution and from SCOTUS rulings, it simply says that law enforcement is supposed to keep general order. They're supposed to defray rights in Tennessee and, in fact, arrest people that someone else tells them that they're a criminal, but they're not required to intercede in any instance until the DA or somebody says, here's a warrant, go arrest that person. Now, will most cops step in and take a bullet for you? Absolutely, and thank God we've got them. But they're not required to by law. There is no statute that says they have to. And if you look at the number of post-certified sworn police officers on duty at any one time, we actually did a research project on this about 6 months ago in Jackson and Madison County. And what we one to about 35 at best, and far worse than that at a different time of the day. And you don't realize that the number of police officers around duty, some of those are supervisors, some of those are actually dispatchers and stuff. So the number of post-certified officers in Madison County driving around the county at night is probably somewhere around 16 or 17. We got nearly 100,000 people in the county. Those odds are pretty slim that if something bad happens to you, that police officer is going to be there. Take a look at the response time in the Covenant shooting is one of the best examples I can give you of that. Those guys, the police officers responded to that, did an excellent job. They got there and stopped the threat in 14 minutes. But in that 14 minutes, what was able to happen? 6 people were killed. And had they not had some kind of security system in the school to let them know that they had an active shooter coming in, there would have been more deaths than there were. Yeah. But it still took 14 minutes. The average crime takes about a minute and a half. And so you can't count on the police officer being there to provide security or safety for you. And what our Constitution says is that self-defense being the true palladium of liberty, in every instance where governments have attempted in any fashion to take away the right of the people to keep and bear arms, liberty, if not annihilated, is on its last death throw, basically. And so, though Scalia quoted St. George Tucker in the Heller decision that said that very thing, that self-defense is the true palladium of liberty, and went on to describe the fact that there are 3 instances where you can use self-defense, and that's against a criminal, either inside or outside of your home, or in case of invaders. And we've got an invasion going on across our southern border right now in spades. And the third thing that he said that was necessary for the people to be able to keep and bear their arms was to stand against a tyrannical government. So all of those things are the reasons the Second Amendment was put in and enshrined. Now,
And we have all those things right now.
Yeah, do what?
We have all those things going on right now.
Absolutely. It's very dangerous to walk around. I mean, if you watch the news at all, it scares you. To let my granddaughters go out, I'm very fearful of that situation right now, because at 11 o'clock in the daytime, they're stealing cars down here at the Walmart. You know, they're walking around. It's a dangerous situation. And you go back. I remember Colonel Charles Askin said this one time. He said, criminals don't fear the police, and they don't fear the courts, and they don't fear jail. They're criminals. The only way that you can stop crime is to make that criminal fear his victim.
Yep.
And so that's the reason we at the Tennessee Firearms Association agree with Scalia when he said that you have an unalienable right to carry a firearm in case of confrontation, either offensive or defensively in public. Those are the things that are spoken of in the Heller opinion. And that is the treatise on which the Second Amendment is put forth until we got to Bruin later on. And Bruin just simply goes back and puts most of what Heller said back in there and said, we've been trying to tell you people, these are the facts, and y'all are not paying attention. If in fact it is not a law that was on the books at the time of the ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you cannot use it for scrutiny with respect to the Second or the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment is what deals with your civil rights. We actually tried to run a bill about 4 years ago. Clay Doggett had it in the House that said the Second Amendment is a civil right, because I actually talked to him. I said, do you agree with me that in the McDonald decision, it said, in fact, that it is a civil right? And he said, yes, I do. So we carried that bill, and law enforcement squashed it everywhere. Every one of the groups that goes up there and lobbies against your right to carry a firearm was lined up 4 deep. The Sheriff's Association, Chiefs of Police, the Department of Safety, and the TBI all opposed that bill. I have no idea why they would, because they take an oath, every one of them take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And so if in fact they do, wouldn't they want to protect your Second Amendment rights?
I would hope. And so in addition to people that are paid by the taxpayer actively lobbying against our rights, the people that worked for Bill Lee, TBI director and Department of Safety officials and others, in addition to that, Sheriff's Association, aren't they a 501c3? Are they supposed to be lobbying?
They are not. That's not what you have to do as a 501c3. That is a designation for a charity. You have to write a mission statement, because what you don't do then, the dollars that you pull into your organization, you don't pay taxes on the 501c3 because it is a charity. But the IRS rules say, in fact, that you have to have a mission statement. That's the only thing you can operate on, is what your mission statement is. And the mission statement of the Sheriff's Association says what they're supposed to do is to instruct and inform the members of the sheriff's departments across the state and to look after their widows and orphans. It does not mention anything about lobbying. In fact, on the 990s that you fill out, they have a question over there that says, do you lobby? And if in fact you do, you lose your charitable status. You cannot be a 501c3 if you lobby outside the interest of your mission statement. Let me correct myself there. You can lobby some, but it has to be directly on what your mission statement says. And so for the Sheriff's Association to come in and say they oppose the ability to carry long guns in Tennessee, that is a bridge too far. That's not their job. For the Department of Safety to come in and say, we don't want to allow 18-year-olds to carry handguns like they've done the last 3 years in a row, is breaching their responsibility. It's outside of what they're supposed to do in the first place. I have done a pretty deep dive into what their rules say they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to keep us safe on the highways. That's what they're supposed to do. And so the Highway Patrol patrols the highways. Wouldn't you think they would have to stay within the confines of what they're supposed to do, what their name is?
I would think.
Yet this year they were adamantly opposed to the allowing us to move long guns back into the permissible list of arms in Tennessee, which, by the way, 42 other states allow. without a permit, 4 more allowed with a permit. And California and Hawaii being 2 of those states that allow you to carry a long gun with the permit if they do a background check. 42 other states say we don't care because it's a long gun. We can see you coming with it. You can't hide it. It's not something we have to worry about. And so, therefore, that number of states allows their citizens to carry a long gun without a permit. Tennessee is one of 4 states that say you can't do that, that calls it a crime. New York, New Jersey, Florida, and Tennessee are the only 4 states in the union which say it's a crime for you to carry a loaded long gun. I find that appalling, actually, being from the volunteer state, which had it not been for the volunteers beginning with the Battle of Kings Mountain, when John Sevier and Isaac Shelby and William Campbell decided they weren't going to put up with what Ferguson said he was going to lay waste to their lands with sword and fire for any man that picked up arms against the crown. And so they got together a bunch of good old boys. They weren't soldiers. They were just citizens, and they picked up their personal rifles, and they marched across the mountains. That's why they call them the Over Mountain Men. And they caught Ferguson over there at Kings Mountain. They shot him off his horse. And then they went home because they weren't soldiers. They were just trying to make sure that their homeland was safe, and they were acting as citizens are supposed to. And when they got done with that, they wanted to make sure when the Constitution was written that you have the right to be able to have the type of arms necessary for a militia to be effective, because we will, at some future time, need that power in our hands. And that's why they enumerated that right, which they said came from God originally. The Constitution didn't give it to us. They just recognized that it's something that we already had.
Absolutely. And you know, think about it. There's no way that the founding generation would intend for the citizens not to be able to defend themselves against a future tyrannical government. That just doesn't make sense. And anybody that's read our history knows that what you're saying is accurate. I want to get on to, I've got a few more questions for you here.
Okay.
The governor and some legislators talk about protecting our rights and public safety. How have they done so far on protecting our rights to keep and bear arms under the Lee administration? You've answered this partially, but I think there's a lot more blanks you can fill in on this.
Well, if you look at the letter that then candidate Bill Lee wrote to us in 2018 when he was seeking votes, we send out a survey every year, and he didn't want to fill the survey out because the questions may have been too specific for him. So he wrote us a letter back. But one of the things I find very interesting in that letter, and one of the videos that I've just done talks about that very thing, but he says that he was the sole candidate that would speak the politically incorrect truth that we should not be using our young persons to try to deny constitutional right to arms to the citizens. And yet what we're doing right now, it appears to me, is we're trying to use the death of some of our young persons in Tennessee to say what we need to do is to take away the right of citizens to own their firearms. You say the big hullabaloo about we've got to do away with assault weapons. Well, assault is an action. It's not an article. Across the board, you can assault somebody with your feet and your hands. Yeah. There were more people killed in Tennessee in the last 2 years with hammers than with AR-15s, but that's the big hullabaloo right now. Oh, we've got to do away with assault weapons. It's simply not a fact that exists. But what they want to do is they operate on feelings. So the Lee administration, when they came out with their constitutional carry, supposed, they didn't include long guns into that like most states do. 42 others without a permit. They didn't say you could carry them in public anywhere. What they did was they increased the criminal aspect of some crimes and manufactured new ones that said, we're going to put you in jail for this or keep you from carrying firearms. So what the governor calls his constitutional carry bill right now allows most people to carry a handgun most places, but you can't carry them in parks with that. And you need to understand, in Tennessee, we have no right to arms. Tennessee is a gun-free zone completely across state, including your front yard, because 3917-1307 says it's an offense to carry a loaded firearm or a club with the intent to go armed. Now, the question that I've had for every person that would listen to me, and they get tired of me hammering them with this, why would you pick up a firearm unless you intended to carry it. That is the most ludicrous statement. And by the way, it was put in to our TCA code, and then they added the codicil in the Constitution. We'll talk about that in a second. But they added that intent to go armed clause in 1870. And I know why they did it. They wanted to be sure that the free black slaves didn't have the opportunity to carry a firearm to protect themselves. And so, therefore, they said it's a crime for you to carry a firearm off of your personal property. And in fact, in some places, it's a crime for you to carry a loaded firearm on your property. They say it's an offense. Now, you can have a defense against that offense with your permit when you pay the tax to the government, which is what it is, and I can prove that, because May Beavers went down and asked the Department of Safety how much overage they had from the cost of the permits to what it actually cost them to produce that. And when they realized that somebody was on to them about charging a whole lot more than it actually cost them, they wrote a check back to the general fund of the state of Tennessee. And what is the general fund? It's the tax receipts. So, in fact, what you're doing when you buy a permit from the state, when you pay them to do the background check and the fingerprints and all that, you're paying a tax for that. And so a tax on a right turns it into a privilege.
Absolutely.
It's just that simple. And across the board, you don't have true constitutional carry in Tennessee, because any police officer in Tennessee can stop you and ask you if you have a firearm. And if you do, if you have a permit, and he can actually take you into custody because you have that firearm, because it's still a crime. Now, if you've got a permit, when you go before the judge the next day, you can raise that as a defense. Or if you've got either your enhanced or your concealed carry only, or the next day when they talk about, well, I was in a place where I had the right to be and I wasn't involved in criminal activity. And so therefore, under the governor's permitless carry, I had the right to do it. And it's an exception at that point. But you can be asked for your papers in Tennessee right now. So that's not a constitutional right. One of the things that Scalia said and Heller said, if in fact future judges can use what we have in the Constitution and they can take those things away from you, it wasn't right in the first place. So that, I think it's necessary for us to understand. The state of Tennessee has done a poor job of allowing you to go back to the original construct of our Constitution in 1796. The analog to the Second Amendment at that point was Article 11, Section 26. And it said the free men of this state have the right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense, period. There wasn't any of this mess about however the legislature has the power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with the view to prevent crime. Now our legislators say, well, look at the Constitution. We've got the right to regulate that. They do not, because that simple clause is unconstitutional. If you go back to what Bruin has said, right, that you have to go back to the historical tradition of laws that deal with the Second Amendment, then you would have to go back to our first analog, which is Article 11, Section 26. And that's just patently obvious to me, but nobody wants to hear that.
You said something a minute ago about there are situations where it's illegal for you to have your firearm on your own property or to carry it. Can you clarify that a little bit?
The whole point of the matter is it's an offense for you to carry a loaded firearm or a club. And in 3917, 1307, it doesn't make a definition or delineation about where that is. So we have to assume that's the entire state, right?
Gotcha. Okay. That just kind of caught me off guard there, and I just wanted to get a little clarification on that. Okay. So the special session is, well, and as we call it, the Bill Lee's special session of official oppression. You actually talked about official oppression a little bit earlier, and that seems to be what his plan is. So what do the people of Tennessee need to understand about the risk of some of the legislators who say, well, we have to do something or we can do something? What's the risk involved there? What do people need to understand about that?
Well, it's like any other legislation that comes out, depending on how judges look at that and prosecutors look at that down the road. Anything that you pass right now, if it has anything to do with firearms at all, then it can be construed any way that a prosecutor or a judge would look at that and take away your liberties. And again, like we said a while ago, that's what Scalia told us. If a future judge can look at what we've written in our Constitution and he can change it up and take it away, it was never right in the first place. And these people were adamant when they talked about the right to self-defense and the right to keep and bear arms. They didn't mince words on that. They were very specific. The only time the word infringed is used in the Constitution is in the Second Amendment. They don't talk about the First Amendment rights. They don't talk about your right to worship, your right to free speech, your right to property, any of those things. They do not say that they can't be infringed, but they were point blank specific with the fact that you cannot, as government, infringe the people's right to keep and bear arms. That bears scrutiny by every person that we put public trust in. They take an oath to honor and defend the Constitution. That is preeminent as far as I'm concerned. That should be one of the true, and like Scalia said, palladiums of liberty that has existed since the founding of this nation. We don't have people who understand what the Constitution means. We deal with feelings now. So if you let a law come out that says, but if this guy appears to be a danger, we can take his guns up, don't you know that there are prosecutors and police departments in this state that will do that?
Absolutely. And something else to consider too. This is not happening in a vacuum, okay? It's not just going to be Tennessee citizens that are going to show up down there at the legislature to be heard one way or the other. The left, the collective left from across this country is going to descend on Nashville. Guaranteed. I mean, we know from things we've read that they already plan on being disruptive. That's just the ones in the state. We've already heard some of the audio that got out on that. And of course, they're talking about having people on their side who want to restrict our right. They're talking about some of them in the crowd will be armed, okay?
Right.
But they want to take arms. Tennessee we're the front of the battle right now because, like I said, the left will descend. They're well-financed, well-funded, well-organized, and that's going to create a lot of pressure on the legislators. And I'm hoping that enough of them will do the right thing and not support. I'm hoping that the first thing out of the mouth of the first legislator is motion to adjourn, and they get a unanimous agreement to adjourn. I hope that's what happens. I'm not confident that that's what will happen, but that's what I hope will happen. But all those people down there, that's going to create a lot of pressure. And here's the other thing, and Bill Lee's going to have this on his head. Whatever happens, because you're essentially opening up Nashville to all the crazies from across the country. They're going to descend. Do you think that something bad's not going to happen? And oh, by the way, if our legislature does what it should and doesn't pass anything resembling a red flag law under any name, what do you think they're going to do? It'll be 2020 all over again and probably worse. So it's not only a threat to our right, it is dangerous to have this, in my opinion.
It is. And my main concern is what type of security is going to need to be provided for our legislators, number one.
Absolutely.
What is that going to cost the taxpayer? Now, if you're going to have 5,000 to 10,000 people show up, and I can promise you, as I have moved across the state, I'm hearing from the folks in these counties that we're going to show up. Where do we meet? Because they're not going to let this stand. They said, we've been silent too long. We've sat on the couch, and we have decided on this instance, we're not going to be silent. You have to go back. We just passed April a little while ago, 19, and I can promise you that they do. And one of the things I want to remind the audience too, if they haven't had a chance to read that letter from Bill Lee, and they can find it on our website, but he said that he wanted to make sure that the Tennessee Constitution and the federal Constitution was taught in all of our schools. And he talks about the fact that he wants to make sure that we honor the 10th Amendment and make sure none of our tax dollars are used to take away our constitutional rights. Now, how many of our tax dollars are we going to have to use right now to keep Nashville from being burned to the ground? If, in fact, the legislators don't pass this red flag law that all the folks up there are just hollering and jumping up and down about. They set fire to the federal courthouse the last time they had a riot in Nashville.
Yep.
What do you think they're going to do this time?
Yep.
And so He's inviting this.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about it, because session's over with. But by calling the special session, he's the only one that can do that.
Right.
He has to put forth what he wants to have happen in that special session. Then the caucuses of both the Senate and the House have told him they don't think it's a good idea and they don't want to do that. And he's not listening to counsel. I know a number of different Republican parties across the state have already written him letters saying, we don't want this red flag session coming up. Don't do this. And he's not paying attention. He's simply not letting our First Amendment rights to speak, or our Article 1, Section 23 rights that say you have the right to petition your government by address or remonstrance. That's every one of these letters going to the governor right now and to the speakers of the House and the Senate is a remonstrance from the people. And they're simply not paying any attention. They're not heeding the people that are supposed to be in charge of government. Article 1, Section 1 says that all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of those ends, they have at all times an unalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they, and that means the people, may think proper. Now, who's paying attention to that in the governor's office? Do you think they have read that in the last 10 years in the governor's office? I don't believe so, because if they truly believed in the Constitution, they'd be going, wait a minute, we got too many people that are not happy with this situation. Why don't we let this thing calm down and approach it back at the start of session next year?
Absolutely.
Which they're going to come back and look at it again anyway, aren't they?
Absolutely. And why not wait 6 months? And without any, there's nowhere near the risk if you wait to do it during the session. But apparently he doesn't actually care about that. So I've got one last question for you. What are the citizens, and you kind of touched on this, some of them are already doing the right thing. Our county and other counties have done resolutions. We've had county GOP resolutions, which are great. We really need, in my opinion, county commission resolutions. I think that would send an even stronger message. But what do the citizens of Tennessee need to do to prevent red flag laws from happening here in Tennessee between now and August 21st?
My perception is that every person that's concerned about this needs to start at the county level. He needs to get in touch, look on the website of your county and find out who your commissioner is. You ought to know, but most people don't. Get in touch with that county commissioner and say, hey, you know, all politics being local, we have you elected to stand for us, and demand that county commission write that letter and say, we don't want you to take away the civil rights of the citizens of Tennessee. Secondarily, I would say that then they need to make sure they get in touch with their county mayor and have him do the same. Have that same conversation. You have a right under Article 1, Section 23 to instruct your representatives. And every person who has been elected to or appointed to a position of trust, go to Article 10, Section 1 and Section 2 and read that. It says every person that has been appointed to or elected to a position of trust is required to take an oath that says they will protect and defend the constitutions of this state and of the United States. If, in fact, they take those seriously, then they need to educate themselves as to what those rights enshrined in those documents are. They need to then get in touch with the governor. Secondarily, or thirdly, call your representative and your senator from your district. Make sure they understand that you're opposed to this. Send them emails. I would hazard a guess that you really ought to write them a paper and ink letter and mail that to them so they can't say that you didn't do it. I would send it return receipt requested. I'd spend the $7 to do that. Put them on notice. Put yourself on record. Take action on your obligation from Article 1, Section 23 to instruct your representatives. That's how you have to understand the Constitution is simply a contract amongst the people. You can read in the preamble to the Tennessee Constitution that the people west of North Carolina and south of the Ohio River decided to get together and form a government or a constitution, which means they're the same thing. A constitution is simply a written document that is the hiring practices for the people to go out and get the servants that they need to do the business of government. We say how old they can be, where they have to live, what their powers are, what we're going to pay them. It's the people that are supposed to be in charge, but right now we're all sitting back on our heels and letting them rule like they're kings. And the Tennessee Constitution says we'll have no hereditary emoluments. In other words, you can't be, just because you're elected governor doesn't mean that you're my king. You
Absolutely.
got to get people involved. You got to get them on the telephone. You got to get them writing letters and emails. That's what they've got to do.
Yeah. And if the legislators are not hearing from us, they're going to be hearing from the other side.
That's correct.
So, well, Richard, I appreciate you coming on. Great information as always. Appreciate what you do, and we'll certainly have you back on again in the future. And God bless you for what you do. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. We're going to transition here just a little bit. I do want to talk just a few minutes about another issue in Tennessee. Well, it's an issue across the country. Everybody knows what's going on our border. We have a federally led invasion of our country. And of course, every state is a border state now, including Tennessee. So this has been going on for a while, especially since Biden got back into office, because Trump did have the border somewhat under control. And if you remember back in 21, as soon as Biden took office, the flood started. And an initial part, a big part of the initial flood were the UACs, the unaccompanied children, unaccompanied alien children, illegal alien children. But going back further than that, we had the DACA program. And DACA is an acronym for Deferred Action Child Arrivals. Deferred Action Children Arrivals. So that was a policy, that was not a law. And that was something that Obama did in his term, is he created the whole DACA program policy. It's not an actual program, not approved by Congress. The DACA kids, and they're not all kids, some of them were brought over here very young, but not all of them. And I'd say some of them are now probably pushing 30, and some are probably older than that. Anyway, they are still illegal aliens. They have no path to citizenship. Technically, they could be deported at any time. If we had the right person in office, they could be deported at any time. Nothing makes them legal. Now, even though they're not legal, under policy, they were given work authorizations, all right? So that allows them to work even though they're illegal. Stupid if you ask me, but that's where we're at. Well, now, if you remember right after Biden took office and our state started getting flooded with all the illegals, Bill Lee and some of the legislators complained. I think Bill Lee sent a couple letters to the administration talking about all of the people coming in, and it was wrong to send them to our state, and it's a burden on our state, yada, yada, yada. And it's absolutely true, it is. A couple of things you need to know that you might not be aware of. So in 2020, late 2020, $7.2 million was given to Catholic Charities. Now, Catholic Charities in Tennessee, primarily, one of the things they do is they manage the refugee program. Now, there was a lawsuit over that because several years back, Tennessee said, hey, we don't want to be in this program anymore. Well, what the federal government did was they just said, okay, you're not in the program anymore. We'll deal with Catholic Charities in your state, and they will have the say over how many refugees you get. Now, understand, refugees and illegal aliens, two completely different things. Refugees do come here legally, whether we like it or not. Whether all of them come here with good purposes, good intents, good potential, they are here legally. But another thing Catholic Charities does is they also were involved with the settling of these UACs, placement of the UACs. Well, so they got $7.2 million. Also, when those people were being brought in at the time, our state, they were giving permits. The state is the one that gives the permits to any organization, religious or otherwise, that is going to house illegals, whether they're here just temporary or whatever. The state was had to approve the permits. They did that in some cases knowing that that entity had a contract with the federal government to bring in illegals into our state. So they've always been a little hypocritical, our state legislature, our state leaders, about this issue. They're complaining to the feds, they're making a show of it, but they funded organizations that help resettle them, they give permits to organizations to help resettle them. But they did something even worse in 2022, and this applies to the DACA kids. It seems that the Republican supermajority in our state has decided that the DACA recipients are an acceptable class of illegal alien, because what they did was what they called the Workforce Expansion Act. It was sponsored in the Senate by Shane Reeves. It was sponsored in the House by a Democrat, Bob Freeman. The bill passed. Now, basically what it did was it awarded commercial and professional licenses to DACA, those who are in the DACA program. They're still illegal aliens. Work authorization does not change that fact. All right, they did that. They were very explicit that they were doing this for the DACA. Now, they also were a little bit deceptive in some of their testimony, and I think maybe led some people to believe that they had a lawful presence. They're not here lawfully, they're here illegally, okay? And by the way, there's a lot of different categories when you're talking about illegal aliens. There's a lot of different categories. But the DACA are illegal. They were created by Obama. Now our state passed a law in 2022 to allow them to get professional and commercial licenses in Tennessee. And so give you just a couple things. Oh, by the way, the governor signed it without a hitch, even though, of course, when he campaigned, he said he was going to be tough on illegal immigration. The sponsors of the bill were explicit that DACA grantees were indeed the beneficiaries of their bill. That's another thing to remember. And most of your DACA kids are either here, they came over the border illegally, or in some cases overstayed a student visa. But the bottom line is this. If you could put the bullets back up there, please, for just a second. All right. Workforce expansion bill. Oh, by the way, on the Senate side for the workforce expansion bill, every senator, and I'm just looking at the Republicans, the Democrats, remember, we have a Republican supermajority. Anything that passes, the Republicans passed it. They allowed it to pass, okay? Every senator except for we said 7 senators. Senator Bowling did not vote for it. Senator Johnson did not vote for it. Senator Crow did not vote for it. Senator White did not vote for it. Senator Hensley did not vote for it. And Senator Pody did not vote for it. Senator Jackson was not there for the vote. Everybody else voted for it. So if you're wondering on the Senate side, if your guy voted for it, he voted for it. He or she voted for it. Like I said, the sponsors of the bill were explicit that this was DACA grantees. They are here illegally. They overstayed their visa, or they're here as a result of Obama's policy. They are not lawfully present in our country. They have the work authorization. They can get the permits. Does not change their status, okay? Now, here's the thing. Tennessee has a law called EVA, Eligibility Verification of Entitlements Act, that basically says anything Tennessee does in regard to immigration is going to be in accordance with federal law. Federal law says, and this was passed at whatever point, to discourage states from encouraging illegal immigration. And so what they did was they passed a law that said, okay, number one, the federal government gets to define what public benefits are. And that includes, public benefits are included as professional or commercial license, all right? Now, they didn't tell states that they could not pass those laws, or give those benefits. But if they were going to do it, they had to explicitly state in the bill. But that's not the way the bill was worded, okay? They didn't come out and spell out that what they were just basically saying in their bill, we're going to consider this no longer a benefit, a benefit of state citizenship. Well, you can't do that because the federal government has already said, and the federal government does have the say-so in terms of illegal immigration law. So they violated the federal law and they violated the state law that said anything we pass will adhere to the federal law when it comes to benefits for illegal aliens, all right? Now, like I said, everybody in the Senate voted for that, to include the guy who is now my state senator, John Stevens. The district has changed. He's now my state senator. We actually had him in our meeting a couple weeks ago. And to his credit, now he said that he didn't quite understand their status, but to his credit, he has agreed this upcoming session to sponsor a repeal bill. So kudos to him for him on that, and we'll be watching and helping him out all we can. Understand that one of the problems we have in the state of Tennessee, and there's a lot of other states, the Chamber of Commerce is not just going to back down on this, okay? Chamber of Commerce supports all this kind of garbage, all right? So you can expect a fight. That's where we need to get involved, all right? Because we can't afford for Tennessee to become a magnet for every DACA recipient across the country. And that's what our state has done, is magnetized us by doing this and by not really being harsh enough overall on issues concerning illegal immigration across Tennessee. So, there's a lot more on this. Matter of fact, the memo is posted on the site, at TennesseeInformer.com. The memo was written by a friend of mine that's a lawyer. I can't give a name right now because I haven't got clearance to do that, but you can look at the memo, dig through the facts for yourself. But just know there's supposed to be a bill to repeal that coming up this session. All right. Hey, I appreciate everybody tuning in, and we had a really good first guest this week with Richard. Next week, we have Representative Bud Halsey, who ran a bill on nullification. Nullification, for those of you who are not familiar with the 10th Amendment, that's how we fight back against the federal government, all right? And there's a whole lot more to it than that, but we'll have more information posted on the website. But next week, matter of fact, starting next week, these shows will be Monday night at 7, not on Tuesday nights. So if you enjoyed the show, like us on Facebook, Tennessee Informer, and subscribe on YouTube. And I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you very much.